So there's been more news that's come out since the passing away of Nex Benedict. We didn't even cover it until a few weeks after the event had occurred, but if you missed it, feel free to go back and watch the old content. Or here's a TLDR: trans non-binary teenager had been being bullied on and off by various students in their school during an increasingly hostile environment in Oklahoma, where laws are passing restricting their rights to access different spaces like bathrooms. And there was an altercation in the bathroom, and more details came out since then. I haven't watched the video, but allegedly there was a video of Nex in like the hospital bed speaking about the event. And allegedly, I think what happened is that there were some cisgender girls who were saying some nasty things about Nex, or maybe Nex's trans friend. There was another trans friend there with Nex. And what the story that I've heard people say, that people, y'all, by the way, are disgusting. If you're like, my video originally was responding to just the death of this child in the context of this transphobic environment, and that transphobia was likely part of why they were being targeted. And then the response to that was like, oh, Nex said in this video that came out after your coverage, like, oh, you're spreading misinformation because Nex started it by allegedly pouring water on these girls, like, or on one of them. So from what I understand it, like, the comments of the girls were what started the altercation. Nex did escalate things somewhat by pouring water on one of them, but then the other girls escalated again to like an actual fight where they were there. Now there's bruises. Now there's someone getting pushed to the floor, so that aspect of the situation, I don't even think that the additional context around it, 3 versus 1 is a jumping, not a fight. It's certainly not an even situation. It's not an even fight. It's not a proportional response. In our legal system, pouring water on someone is assault. I disagree personally with that categorization, but whatever. So I don't think that Nex was probably aware that pouring water on these girls was going to cause them to then beat up Nex. And I've also heard some people say that according to Nex's friends, Nex actually uses he, him pronouns and not they, them pronouns. I have not seen that corroborated. But I'm going to probably just switch between they and him. I don't know. Like, I don't want to disrespect this person, but I'm not totally sure what the correct mode is here. He preferred he, him, but didn't mind they, them, according to chatter. Okay, cool. Drink more water. Oh my God, my throat is so dry. So there's going to be an investigation. So, I can come to my conclusions. We could watch the video of Nex talking about the fight, but ultimately it's going to be part of an investigation by the education department. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. There's an investigation being launched into the death of Nex Benedict by the Department of Education. Opening investigation because they were allegedly being bullied for months over their gender identity. And someone mentioned in the chat earlier, like, we talked about it in the original video, but it is worth mentioning that Nex was Indigenous and that probably some racial dynamic was part of it. Like, maybe a white non-binary student in Nex's situation, like, would not have been as harshly targeted. Like, it's particularly because Indigenous Native Americans have traditions involving gender fluidity and gender nonconformity, and then like white people punish that. So I think that this was basically a situation where some like white girls beat up a trans Indigenous non-binary person. But anyway, so the Department for the Office for Civil Rights notified the Human Rights Campaign of the investigation, saying, this was opened in response to a letter sent by the LGBTQ rights organization. So the Human Rights Campaign sent the Department of Education, or the Office for Civil Rights, a letter saying, can you please look into this? And that's why the investigation has now been opened. Looking into Owasso Public Schools' failure to respond appropriately to the sex-based harassment that may have contributed to Nex's death. The president of HRC says, "We are deeply concerned about the failure of Owasso High School to address documented instances of bullying, violence, and harassment against Nex, which occurred in earnest over the course of the previous school year and were in violation of Nex's rights under Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972. So there were also some people commenting on my content about this, saying things like, oh, whatever, bullying is normal. You don't have special protection from bullying. And it's like, actually, sex-based discrimination goes against Title IX. So therefore, if you're bullying someone based on their trans identity, or, even if you're like bullying a woman in a specific way because she's a woman and you're like making fun of her for that, like, this is sex-based protections. Trans people have sex-based rights protections as trans people. So no, actually, it isn't legal and normal and deserving of the same response as your run-of-the-mill bullying. Also, bullying is normal is something usually said by people with tendencies towards bullying. No kidding. Yeah, I doubt that it would surprise you to know that the tone of many of those comments was quite nasty, and calling me like a snowflake for caring about a dead teenager, basically. And it's, it's obviously there's the assault aspect for sure. So yeah, the HRC president says, "We are urging the department to urgently investigate whether Owasso High School unlawfully failed to address the discrimination and harassment to which Nex was subjected. In addition, we call upon the department to conduct a Title IX compliance investigation for Owasso High School." These calls for federal investigation were amplified by other LGBTQ leaders. Key details surrounding Nex's death and identity are still unclear, according to this article from The Hill. The mother, Sue Benedict, I don't actually know, is that the mother or the grandmother? I've seen different reports. But Sue says that Nex did not see themselves as male or female. They saw themselves as right down the middle. Friends said that Nex was trans and primarily went by he, him pronouns at school, but also used they, them pronouns. The police investigation is still ongoing, apparently. Local authorities said last week they have not ruled out the fight as a possible cause of Nex's death. I love how that detail is just tucked in here instead of it being front and center. Like when the initial autopsy report came out, it was front and center. Trauma was not the reason for this death. Totally unrelated reason. Like, I don't know why this teenager died. It definitely wasn't from getting beat up and having their head hit the concrete floor. But like, we haven't seen any additional details since then. And then like, oh, but the police have now quietly, after the fact, said, well, maybe it might have been because of the head hitting the floor in the concrete in an altercation in the bathroom. Maybe that's related to their sudden passing away. Like, okay, cool, whatever. People are also calling for the removal of the superintendent, Ryan Walters, who has made transphobic statements in the past. Yeah, so obviously we're still going to be awaiting answers for a while, but I am really surprised. I was not expecting that the Department of Education was going to take a step in here, that there is going to be a more thorough investigation, and at the same time, there's a police investigation going on. We can hope that these young people are maybe taken to account for the assault that they committed, maybe like some minor consequences for that, perhaps. And also we can hope that the school gets some kind of retributive action on it as well, the administrators who are allowing this to happen, because this was known. The bullying about Nex's trans identity was known to be ongoing by the family and by teachers for a while. There are students still at the school who acknowledge that this is an ongoing problem, and Nex is not the only trans kid there and not the only one who's been bullied for being trans there. So often, we're just expected to turn the other cheek and act like the bigger person. Like being expected to be the bigger person is like just an ongoing way of getting oppressed peoples to stop responding to their oppression. And that these kids, like that there's no information about whether these kids are being investigated. I haven't seen anything about, oh, do we know who the kids are? I'm not asking for them to be named, because obviously they're minors, they're children themselves, and it wouldn't be until after they were convicted that their identities would be like revealed. But like, can we get any information about whether these children are going to face any consequences? Are they even, like, again, do we even know who they are? I've not seen any coverage that indicates that those children or that their families are under investigation in any way. Standard right-wing play, yeah, the playbook for the right-wing news. Blast information now, whisper the correction later. Yeah, blast misinformation now, my bad. I'm not familiar with previous Department of Education investigations. I don't really think this is the kind of thing that happens very often. I'm curious what all that's going to entail and what sort of judgment can they put down? Because the Department of Education is, I guess, is that part of the executive branch, kind of? Under the purview of the executive branch? It's extremely underfunded. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that at all. Let's see. I'm going to see if Erin Reed has any more information about this. So she adds there are two potential avenues under which these violations could have occurred. One is responding to alleged harassment of students in a manner consistent with Title IX, versus whether the district failed to appropriately respond to alleged harassment of students in a manner consistent with Section 504 and Title II. So it could just be a more general requirement of, making sure these kids have access to education. According to the Human Rights Campaign, Nex first began being bullied shortly after the state's trans bathroom ban was signed into law. So according to the HRC, who presumably got their information from the family, like, the bullying that Nex was experiencing began after after state law passed, which indicates that the more official the response, the more official the transphobia, I think the more permissive it feels. Like, that people feel motivated to be hateful toward trans people when it's being officially sanctioned. Has there been any update on the autopsy or even the toxicology report? I haven't seen any particular updates on the autopsy or toxicology report. I have heard people claiming that fentanyl was involved, and I'm like, how did a 16-year-old get a hold of fentanyl? A 16-year-old who, by all rights, is a totally normal kid. Like, this is not a kid who is skipping school or doing any behaviors that indicate that they're on drugs or anything. Like, the family basically had nothing but good things to say about the kid. So, there's certainly no behaviors that would indicate drug use. But I don't think, yeah, I know why, people claiming fentanyl, but I don't, I'm like, what autopsy report are you looking at? I don't think these reports have been released yet. As of February 20, the Owasso Police Department says that a thorough investigation is being conducted, and they are waiting on an autopsy report and toxicology results. Why would a tox screen be done for a head injury? I don't know. Anything for them to try to deflect blame off of the very obvious sudden death from head injury. Much love to my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Michelle Frattaroli, Amanda B., Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Sojo, Elizabeth Bartell, Ella V. Nobody, Kevin Young, Sarah A., Athiet, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.